The King's Avatar, Chapter 579, Audio Source, WuxaWorldAudiobook.com. Chapter 579. Starting at the top. Wandering Peak was Jiang Yu's main account in the Heavenly Domain and Tyrannical Ambitions guild leader. Yishu had interacted with him in the 10th server before, but he hadn't really cared. In his eyes, there was no difference between Cold Knight or Jiang Yu. A famous name like Wandering Peak didn't need any tags next to his name. For Glory's players, in terms of reputation, the guild leaders of these top-tier guilds weren't any less renowned than pro players. All of them could be considered public figures. Wandering Peak didn't need the guild leader tag for people to recognize him. As Yishu moved Unrivaled Super Hottie forward, Happy Sheep introduced who was who. Besides their IDs, Happy Sheep also told him their titles in the guild. It's like how in real life, whenever people introduce someone else, people always tells others about that someone else's job. However, several of the titles sounded kind of funny to Yishu. For example, Tyrannical Ambition 4th Branch's #1 Knight and so on. There were just too many adjectives attached to the title. However, none of the adjectives could be removed. Get rid of Tyrannical Ambition. Then, the title wouldn't seem very impressive. Get rid of 4th Branch. It wouldn't be the truth. Oh. Yishu responded with an "oh" after each player's introduction. After the introductions were finished, he concluded, "Hi, everyone." With Jiang Yu's status, his character's equipment was naturally top tier. Equipment was a symbol of status. Whether it was Tyrannical Ambition's great guild leader or the branch guild's #1 knight. If they walked out with Unrivaled Super Hottie's equipment, it would practically be the same as walking out naked. No one would take their title seriously. Unrivaled Super Hottie? What an interesting name. Speaking of your name, I once knew someone called Unrivaled Silent, but I haven't seen him in a long time. It seems like he really did go silent. The first person to speak was Tyrannical Ambition 4th Branch's #1 Knight, Flight. It sounded like a joke, but it clearly showed his hostility towards Unrivaled Super Hottie. This wasn't unexpected. Very few players were as kind as 7 Blossom Leaves. Online games were competitive in nature. In the normal servers, everyone compared their levels to other players. In the Heavenly Domain, everyone was max level, so they compared their equipment, stats, skill level, experience, dungeon progress, arena record, and so on. Anything could be compared would be compared. The competitive environment didn't differ from real life too much. Very few were willing to admit their inferiority. Like Flight, 7 Blossom Leaves, or even Crispy Bean. They were their team's #1 knight. Relatively speaking, they were at the top of their respective teams. Honest and kind players like 7 Blossom Leaves were the exception. Most players were like Crispy Bean, who looked down on experts of the same class. However, everyone showed off their feelings in different ways. Crispy Bean was more childish. Flight handled things more maturely. He clearly knew that Unrivaled Super Hottie was someone the guild leader wanted to rope into the guild. Moreover, the guild leader personally came over to invite him, showing the importance of this matter. If he made things too difficult for Unrivaled Super Hottie, he wouldn't be giving face to the guild leader. The enormous guild had an almost corporation-like management. The higher a guild member's status, the more the guild member wouldn't be able to look at things purely from a gaming perspective. A lot of matters had to be handled responsibly. Guild leaders weren't mothers to the guild members. Even though they often acted like one, everyone knew how much power these guild leaders possessed. Unrivaled Silence. What class? Yishu responded to Flight's words. Class. It's been too long. I forgot. Quote. Despite being startled, Flight responded quite calmly. "Oh, is that so?" Ye Zhu said, and even added a "ha ha" emoticon. Flight suddenly felt dejected. Unrivaled silence. He didn't know anyone like that. He just saw Unrivaled Super Hottie's name and then fabricated a person to mock the other side's arrogance. But then the other side asked for this imaginary person's class and he couldn't give an answer. The "ha ha" emoticon seemed to be laughing at him. "I've heard how skilled you are. Today, I've finally gotten to see it." Happy Sheep did the introductions. Flight opened up the meeting. Now, it was Jiang Yu's turn to speak up. The fourth branch's guild leader didn't get a chance to talk though. This simple exchange showed the complexity of the relationships between guild members. "Ha ha, the rumors are true." Of course, of course. Normal people would hear his arrogance and explode in anger. Jiang Yu didn't have the best temper either, so it made Flight quite puzzled when he saw how friendly Jiang Yu was being. Even though he wasn't a part of the main guild, he still had some understanding of the overall guild leader. Jiang Yu wasn't as cold and strict as Han Wenqing, but he still leaned towards that side. Flight had never heard of him being so friendly before. What was going on today? Someone's personality couldn't suddenly change in an instant, which meant the reason lay with Unrivaled Super Hottie. Was he really that good? Flight muttered to himself. He didn't look down on Unrivaled Super Hottie because of his equipment. After all, equipment was external. If his skill was truly up to mark, then his equipment would immediately be switched with equipment that might even be good as his own. Seeing the overall guild leader's attitude, Flight felt a bit of regret towards his initial remarks. Speaking of which, it didn't matter who this person was. What was the point in competing with him? Today was a rare opportunity to interact with the main guild leader. It was more important to show his worth. WuxRWorldAudio.com. Flight had his own plans. Even though their branch guilds were also a part of tyrannical ambition in name, in everyone else's eyes, the main guild was the true guild. The branch guild players all hoped to enter the main guild. The main guild had obviously reached its max capacity a long time ago. According to the guild's rules, the guild wouldn't kick someone out for no reason. But everyone knew that the rules weren't rigid. If a truly outstanding expert came, the main guild would certainly find some way to get someone out of the guild. As for Flight, he didn't think being the fourth branch's #1 knight was good enough. Speaking of this, he hated how others always added fourth branch after tyrannical ambition when being introduced. He felt like these two added words made it sound like a joke. He hoped to get rid of these two words. The only way to do it was obviously to join the main guild. This was why he hoped his strength would be enough to garner the attention of someone with power in the main guild. Unfortunately, he had held the title of #1 knight in the fourth branch for a long time, but the main guild hadn't given him any offers. Today, the overall guild leader had personally come, making Flight feel like it was a good opportunity to display his value. However, the reason for the personal visit was because of another knight. Flight couldn't help but feel jealous, so he intentionally showed hostility towards Unrivaled Super Hottie. If Unrivaled Super Hottie was truly acknowledged by the overall guild leader, then didn't that mean he would directly enter the main guild? He need to perform better than him. Flight had made the decision a long time ago, but now that he was reflecting on his previous actions, using words to compete against him felt somewhat childish. He immediately criticized himself. He already knew what he needed to do today. He needed to show that his skills surpassed Unrivaled Super Hottie's. That was the only true way. A word battle was pointless. Flight arranged his plan, while Jiang Yu and the others told him their purpose in coming here. A wild boss? Ye Zhu stared blankly. No way. Even Chen Guo was astonished. It might be a game, but wasn't this spying progressing too quickly? Other spies took 3 years and then another 3 years to get this far. But Unrivaled Super Hottie had only just joined a small support guild only 2 days ago, and he was already going to join the elites in a fight for a wild boss. Normal guilds didn't pay too much attention to the rules. Experts would immediately be put into the top team, but for a club guild with such a complicated competitive environment, wild bosses were very important and dangerous matters. If there was a spy from another guild, it would be disastrous. Strategies, plans, and so on would be sold out by the spy. It would be impossible to steal the boss if that happened. Yes, Sword Peak Ravine's Blade Master Lan Rui has spawned. Our people are already heading over. We're going over to support them. You just happen to be online. Why not come with us? Jiang Yu said. Sure. Ye Zhu happily accepted. Good. Brother, your equipment. Jiang Yu looked at him and had to say it. Brother, you can't join our guild yet, so I can't give you contribution points to use. You'll just have to make do with this for now. Jiang Yu had clearly been prepared. If not, why would an elementalist carry a full set of knight equipment? Ye Zhu wasn't polite and accepted the trade from Wandering Peak. It was a complete set from accessories to weapons. It was far better than his current equipment. For a normal player, his equipment went up to grades. It was enough to feel moves. As a result, Ye Zhu expressed his thanks and quickly put them on. Then, he requested for a trade with Wandering Peak and offered his trash equipment. I'll have to trouble you to donate these equipment for me. Ha 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 ha. Ye Zhu said. This? Jiang Yu was sweating. He was an elementalist. With his strength, carrying a knight's armor, weapon, and shield would definitely impact his movement heavily. The equipment he had brought with him were for Unrivaled Super Hottie. Now the other side was giving him back equipment. It wouldn't be good to carry it in an intense battle. But the other side said he was donating it to the guild. How could he refuse? It wouldn't be appropriate to say, "You can keep it." Quote, with new improved equipment, why would he keep his old trash? Most players would donate their old equipment to the guild. Unrivaled Super Hottie's actions weren't weird. It was just that this guy was telling him to donate it for him, leaving Jiang Yu at a loss for what to do. End chapter. The King's Avatar, Chapter 580. Audio source, wuxia-world-audiobook.com. Chapter 580 On Equal Footing. It wouldn't be good to accept the equipment, but it also wouldn't be good to refuse the equipment. These situations were a test of the perceptiveness of his subordinates. Sure enough, the fourth branch guild leader wasn't just a guild leader in name. He had heard their conversation and immediately interjected. I should probably be the one to donate the equipment. After all, you're still a part of the fourth branch. The awkwardness was easily resolved. Even Flight felt happy. When he heard that Unrivaled Super Hottie was still a part of the fourth branch, how could he not be happy? Entering the main guild was his goal. At this moment, his competitor was Unrivaled Super Hottie. He didn't want to be beat by his competitor. Soon afterwards, Jiang Yu parroted the fourth branch guild leader's words and cancelled the trade. The fourth branch guild leader traded with Unrivaled Super Hottie and received the trash equipment full of tears. He was a berserker, a physical class. Carrying a set of equipment wouldn't affect his movements as much as an elementalist. His movements would still be affected, but he had to take the burden at this moment. There's no time to lose. Let's go, Jiang Yu said. Everyone said okay. All of them were elite core members of the guild. The elite core members in the main guild were closer to Jiang Yu and seemed like good friends of his. But for the fourth branch guild players, their relationship with Jiang Yu wasn't as close and they seemed more like underlings. Jiang Yu's Wandering Peak led the way. Not a single player moved ahead of him. The group of players followed after Wandering Peak and quickly left Luxuriant Mountain City. Luxuriant Mountain City was a city on the mountains. After leaving the city, it would be similar to going down a mountain. Sword Peak Ravine, where the wild boss was located, happened to be the neighboring level 70 area. Sword Peak's Blade Master Lan Rui was a drifter. Consistent with the boss's style, even though he was a Blade Master in name, his skill set wasn't as simple as just a Blade Master's skill set. Lan Rui mainly used Blade Master skills, but he could use skills from the other three swordsman classes as support. Besides that, he could also use a few striker moves and a few grappler throwing skills. The more skills a boss possessed, the harder the boss. A boss's difficulty wasn't simply determined by its health, defense, or attack. A boss's complicated moveset and excellent AI made a boss less predictable and harder to deal with. Level 70 wild bosses were the hardest bosses in Glory. Their settings were naturally at their highest. The level 70 cap had been added to the game for 3 years already. Even so, up until now, no one had figured out the system's AI for level 70 wild bosses in the heavenly domain. Wild bosses only spawned 52 times in a year and there were always huge crowds of players fighting over them. It wasn't possible to do any tests on them. In addition, these wild bosses had numerous skills available to use, making it nearly impossible for players to determine any patterns from one. At this point, players had figured out the skills for each boss and how to suppress them. There were a few guides out there, but these guides were very theoretical and lacked practicality. Level 70 wild bosses were the targets of all the top guilds and most of the fighting revolved around the players. Under these circumstances, what was the point of a guide? Level 70 wild bosses were absolutely events that the guild leaders of the club guilds personally led. However, just a team from a branch guild wouldn't be enough. For this type of difficult war, the main force would be comprised of the elite guild members. The only reason that Jiang Yu's Wandering Peak even came here was because of unrivaled Super Hottie. When they arrived at Sword Peak Ravine, the team didn't stop for a break and continued running towards a certain direction. Leveling areas naturally had a lot of small monsters scattered around, but for these elite guild members, they were familiar with all the major areas in the heavenly domain. These monsters wouldn't obstruct them. After going deep into Sword Peak Ravine, the team joined together with Tyrannical Ambition's main force. Chen Guo looked at Yishu's screen and swept across all of the IDs lined up. Nearly all of them had some reputation in the heavenly domain. She clearly knew that these players were all a part of the upper class in Glory. She had been with Excellent Era for so many years, yet she had never been able to join their circle. Yishu and his unrivaled Super Hottie hadn't even been in the guild for 2 days yet and he was already a member. Chen Guo couldn't help but feel somewhat upset. Apart from the elites of the main guild, all of the branch guilds had a team too, for a total of around 200 players. The main guild was the main force, while the branch guilds were for support. Tyrannical Ambition was only a part of the forces in the ravine. Yishu had unrivaled Super Hottie look around and quickly saw 2 other guilds in formation. 100 Blossom Valley, Samsara. Samsara again. Yishu noted. Samsara's momentum in the competitive scene was growing. In the game, their guild was also making movements everywhere. They almost always participated in every event possible. It was the bearing of a top guild. 100 Blossom Valley was a bit weaker, but a level 70 wild boss couldn't be missed. Even if they were slightly weaker, it didn't mean they had no chance. Wild bosses hadn't gone to the point where the old titans had a completely monopoly over them. The forces from these two guilds were also led by their guild leaders. 100 Blossom Valleys, Blooming Blossom and Samsara's 3 realms 6 paths were both standing next to their forces. Along with tyrannical ambition, the three forces stood as three competing rivals. At this moment, Jiang Yu's Wandering Peak arrived at the scene. Tyrannical Ambition's players naturally gave a greeting and Wandering Peak went forward to stand. The heads of these top guilds began glaring at one another. Afterwards, Blooming Blossom and 3 realms 6 paths, along with everyone else, turned their attention to the person next to Wandering Peak. Unrivaled Super Hottie. What an eye-catching name. At this moment, he stood casually next to Wandering Peak. The three guilds showed good sense. In order to let their guild leader stand out, the rest of the troops stood behind the guild leader. But someone unexpectedly had no eyes and stood alongside Wandering Peak. He didn't have any guild tag next to his name and his name was so arrogant too. WuxRWorldAudio.com. Yishu's unrivaled Super Hottie only need to stand there in order to instantly capture everyone's attention. The ravine was completely silent. Only the faint noise of grinding could be heard among Tyrannical Ambition's players. Flight felt regretful. With all of these heroes of Tyrannical Ambition in front of him, his title of the #1 knight in the 4th branch felt worthless. Even the 4th branch guild leader probably didn't have a higher status than these elites from the main guild. In the end, Flight and the other branch members stood at the back. But this unrivaled Super Hottie actually followed Wandering Peak to the front and even became the focus of everyone's attention. Flight didn't feel good. For one, this guy was such a disgrace. At the same time, he also felt a bit jealous. However, Flight knew very well that he would never have the courage to just casually stand alongside the guild leader. Who's this idiot? Tyrannical Ambition's players held themselves back, but the players from the other two guilds were already laughing in ridicule. They spoke in very loud voices, so the other side could hear them. Unrivaled Super Hottie was perfectly composed. He ignored all of the insults and went straight to the main subject. Where's the boss? His words switched the topic to a very sensitive subject. The two guild leaders naturally had to appear calm, but they couldn't help but feel somewhat uneasy seeing this guy standing with Wandering Peak. To put it plainly, no one in the game besides another club guild leader could stand on equal footing with a club guild leader. Could this person be a pro player from Tyrannical Ambition? Zheng Chenfeng. The two guild leader immediately made a guess. Zheng Chengfeng was a knight pro player from Tyranny. His character was called Mountain Split and he could be considered a top player, who was a part of the main roster. Even though he wasn't a god, he was more than good enough for players in the game to worship him. Who is this? The two guild leaders hesitated. The first to speak was 3 realms 6 paths. Unrivaled Super Hottie actually walked up with him. Even Jiang Yu jumped up in fright. He had walked up loftily to the other two guild leaders, showing his imposing manner as a guild leader. He really hadn't noticed someone was next to him. Now that the other side suddenly asked him a question, Jiang Yu didn't know how to respond. What should he say? He found an expert. The problem was that he hadn't personally seen his skill before. What type of entity was Tyrannical Ambition? No matter how great of an expert one might be, one still wouldn't qualify to stand on equal footing as him. If he really did say that, he would feel quite ashamed. For a moment, he didn't know how to explain the situation. He truly wasn't happy seeing this guy next to him. Couldn't you have given me a notice beforehand so I could prepare? Now you've put me on the spotlight with no explanation to give. He really hadn't noticed that someone had been walking with him, but how could he say that? Are you talking to me? Unrivaled Super Hottie didn't make him worry and replied, I'm an expert passing by. It seemed like there was a lot of people here, so I came over to help out. Where's the boss? Let's hurry up and start. You're all wasting time. What if another boss spawns? His words hit the nail on the head. This was one issue among the guilds. Wild bosses didn't spawn at a set time. They might not see a wild boss for 1 or 2 days. Sometimes, multiple wild bosses would spawn at the same time. The guilds all wanted the bosses for themselves. If multiple wild bosses spawned at the same time and they were too greedy, they might not even get one. But if they just focused on one, they felt too unwilling to part with the other ones. All of the guilds knew which bosses had spawned already this week and which ones hadn't. Several of them hadn't spawned yet, so it was possible that another could appear at any time. They had to hurry. His words weren't wrong. But the problem was, how did a random passerby get to say these words? ... But for the two opposing guild leaders, the situation had changed. This person was so calm and decisive. He covered up his identity very casually. Could he really be Zheng Changfeng? End chapter.
The King's Avatar, Chapter 581, Audio Source, WuShouWorldAudiobook.com. Chapter 581, Pleased Knights. The two guild leaders were suspicious. They didn't dare make any rash movements. Where was the boss? This question didn't need to be answered. Everyone was gathered around here. Who would let the boss out of their sight? It was just that because there were so many players, some of the players, such as Unrivaled Super Hottie, would have their line of sight blocked by others. After this question was asked, a few players couldn't help but turn around and look in a certain direction. Yishu noticed their actions and naturally adjusted his position so he could see the boss. No one else moved. Unrivaled Super Hottie jogged out of the crowd alone, alarming everyone else. What are you planning on doing? Quite a few players yelled. They were still in the stalemate stage. The boss need to be fought over. But according to convention, everyone was supposed to spend some time talking to each other. Tyrannical Ambitions guild leader had just arrived, so it should be time to have some small talk with each other. But Unrivaled Super Hottie had taken away the spotlight. The small talk hadn't even finished yet and he was already moving. What was he doing? Was he trying to take the initiative to show his power? Who held the boss's aggro was an important deciding factor in who ended up winning the boss. At this moment, a knight was moving towards the boss, causing everyone to be alarmed. The hearts of Blooming Blossoms and Three Realms' 6 paths started to thump. They suddenly remembered that today's wild boss, Blade Master Lan Rui, had an aggressive personality, so knight skills with taunting effects were twice as effective than normal. Knights already had the advantage in grabbing aggro, even more so against Lan Rui. If the outcome of today's battle came down to aggro, knights would undoubtedly be extremely crucial. Was this why Zheng Changfeng personally came out to help? It wasn't impossible for a pro player to occasionally come out and participate in this type of battle. For example, if the club need a certain material from a boss, then they would send a pro player over to ensure they obtained that material. The two guild leaders immediately thought of this possibility. If that really was the case, then competing against him head-on would be hopeless. They need to kill the pro player first in order to have a chance at victory. In a chaotic battle between hundreds of players, a pro player could be killed too. The existence of a pro player added pressure to the two guild leaders, but they didn't need to go so far as to retreat. A pro player could increase that side's chances of winning, but it didn't mean a guaranteed victory. Also, wasn't this Zheng Changfeng too confident? Did he really think just the addition of himself would allow Tyrannical Ambition to easily swipe up Blade Master Lan Rui? The two guild leaders gave out orders for a team of their players to sneak out and directly attack Unrivaled Super Hottie to turn the momentum around. Zhang Yu noticed their actions and couldn't just ignore it. He also gave out an order. tyrannical ambition sent out two teams seemingly to protect unrivaled super hottie. The two sides hadn't even used a tenth of their total troops yet. They clearly wanted to probe out the situation first. But to have already reached this step without even saying some words first indicated how quickly today's battle was progressing. At this moment, unrivaled super hottie shouted, "Everyone, don't panic. I'm just taking a look." "Looking at what?" someone responded. "Looking to see where the boss is. I couldn't see it from where I was standing before." Unrivaled super hottie told the truth. The reason was too plain and simple. The two guild leaders didn't have time to analyze it in detail and directly expressed that they didn't believe him. They immediately gave out an order: the other tyrannical ambition players don't matter. Unrivaled super hottie cannot be allowed to get close to the boss. When the order came out, the two guilds each sent out a team. They went over to the previous team that had been sent out before and firmly stood in front of unrivaled super hottie, blocking his path to the boss. Seeing that a fight could start at any moment, unrivaled super hottie halted and asked incredulously, "I'm not even allowed to look?" "Look? How do you plan on looking?" The players blocking his path questioned him. Unrivaled super hottie didn't reply, but then suddenly ran to the side and rolled. Several magic spells and bullets landed on the spot where he had just been standing. These two guilds actually decided to first get rid of this hidden danger before doing anything else. But they didn't think that this guy was actually so alert. The sneak attacks from these two guilds missed. In a situation with swords drawn and bows bent, any movement could be the trigger, let alone such a frightening wave of attacks. The two tyrannical ambition teams that had come out to protect unrivaled super hottie counterattacked out of reflex. But since they didn't know where those sneak attacks had come from, they simply attacked the most convenient target around. The two teams attacked with a bang. In any case, the other two guilds were their opponents. It didn't matter who was who. In this battle, the players from Samsara and 100 Blossom Valley were the first to fall. This was a group battle. The weak characters wouldn't be able to survive under concentrated fire even with help from clerics. This battle had begun too suddenly. None of them had been prepared, so it wasn't a surprise some of them died. When the two guilds saw that they had lost a few players, how could they be nice anymore? They immediately returned fire and the three sides immediately began fighting each other. These players completely reacted out of instinct. None of them had received orders from their superiors. Their minds were clear though. A fight was a fight. They were going to fight sooner or later anyways. But the important part was not to kill off any one side, but to get a hold of the boss within this chaotic mess. Blooming Blossoms and Three Realms Six Paths immediately thought of unrivaled super hottie. Was he going to use this opportunity to get close to the boss? However, because of the chaos, it was difficult to find a specific person. They couldn't see where unrivaled super hottie had gone to, alarming the two guild leaders. This pro player couldn't be allowed to make a sneak attack. Where was unrivaled super hottie right now? He was just standing on the side in a daze. He really hadn't done it intentionally. Yishu didn't think he made any weird moves. How did it turn out like this? He couldn't understand why. Blooming Blossoms and Three Realms Six Paths couldn't find unrivaled super hottie, so they passed down orders to find him. With so many eyes looking, unrivaled super hottie was quickly found. "He's over here," someone reported. "What's he doing?" the guild leaders asked anxiously. "He's doing nothing," the player replied. "What?" The minds of the two guild leaders froze. This was completely different from what they had anticipated. WuxaWorldAudio.com. Did this mean the plans that they had prepared could only be tossed away now? At this moment, Yishu had nothing to do, but he wasn't alone for too long. Zhang Yu came over to him. "Brother, could you secretly pull the boss over? Will that be a problem?" Zhang Yu asked. "I'll try," Yishu replied. "Okay, we'll do our best to give you cover." Zhang Yu said. As a result, unrivaled Super Hottie immediately headed over to the boss's location. The players from the other two guilds had received similar orders. After all, this battle was for the boss. They had already started fighting with each other. It wouldn't be right to just let the boss stand there and watch them. The three players sent out to secretly pull the boss over met together in this way. Everyone else was surprised to see them as they saw as the three knights rushed out at practically the same time. The three knights used a charge and instantly closed the distance with the boss. Then, the three knights went into a pose together, but stopped there. None of them moved. The three knights were surprised, but they understood the reason. Against Blade Master Lan Rui, Provoke would definitely work, but the effects didn't overlap. In other words, the last person to use Provoke would cover up the previous user's Provoke. Thus, in order to use Provoke to aggro the boss, the player who used it last would be the winner. The three knights were all experienced, so they were waiting for the other knights to act first. But because of this, none of them acted, so they just stood there. Ha ha! Only Yi Shu could laugh in this comical situation. He was the first one to understand, so he made the second step the fastest. Since they were stopping each other from using Provoke, it essentially meant that Provoke couldn't be used to start the fight. Thus, it would just be better to be the first player to deal damage to the boss. Unrivaled Super Hottie stepped forward, while laughing. Only then did the other two knights react. Their slower response made them very annoyed. Since it looked like they wouldn't be able to reach the boss before Unrivaled Super Hottie could do so, the only other option was to stop Unrivaled Super Hottie from getting closer. The two knights had the same thoughts, but neither of the two attacked. Ha ha! Quote. Another laugh. Unrivaled Super Hottie was the first to enter the boss's aggro range. Blade Master Lan Rui was already heading towards Unrivaled Super Hottie. Unrivaled Super Hottie's laugh made the two knights feel like crying. Why did he laugh again? Because they repeated the previous scene. Before, because they wanted to cover up the other person's Provoke, none of them acted. But this time, both of them wanted to stop Unrivaled Super Hottie, but then they immediately thought, I'll let the other guy attack him, while I go and take the boss. Thus, the two knights didn't move. There was nothing they could do. The two knights weren't partners but competitors. Bang! The first clash finally happened, and it was between Blade Master Lan Rui and Unrivaled Super Hottie. This sound made the hearts of many players shatter. The two knights from 100 Blossom Valley and Samsara turned in distress to look at their respective guild leaders. They failed to complete their guild leaders' orders and let Unrivaled Super Hottie take the first victory. Suddenly, a player from 100 Blossom Valley rushed out. He jumped high into the air. His equipment clearly added to his jump height. While in midair, he carried his gun in one hand, while throwing stuff out of his pockets with his other hand. In an instant, all sorts of bullets and grenades rained down from the skies. Tyrannical Ambition's guard team was completely enveloped by the airstrike. They cried out in fear and scattered, but were unable to escape from the attack's range. The noises from the gunfire and explosions linked together like a song from a symphony. In that short moment, the chain of skill effects looked like 100 flowers blossoming. This Spitfire landed on the ground as the smoke from his surroundings faded away. Only then did Tyrannical Ambition's players regain their composure. They shouted for heals but didn't receive a response. They suddenly realized, where were the clerics? Their clerics had unexpectedly disappeared. End chapter.